So it was a book I found very absorbing, a book which I learned a lot from, because as you mentioned in the book, there are many factors about India's history, India's fight for independence. We're not as well documented as other countries in many ways. And while it does talk about the heroism and the sadness of historical India, it also touches upon themes which are so very relevant today, whether it's the media world, whether it's nationalism. It has many factors which are so relevant today. And Jyotsna, to start with you, you wrote this with your dad. I mean, this is a question I'm really curious about. You wrote this with your father. How does that work? Whose idea was it? What was the process like?
Hi, everyone. Okay. And thanks, Vikram, for inviting me here. This book could have been written many, many years ago. We've had this story lying at home. I mean, the paper was started by my great-grandfather. My grandfather was the freedom fighter. And yet I think the struggle was to convince my father. So my father's also a journalist. And the reason it took, I think, about 2 years of convincing my father was because of the beginning chapters of the book on Punjab terrorism, which well, then really no spoilers, but during terrorism, the family newspaper was targeted very heavily, and a parcel bomb was sent to the family where 2 people died in the office. So my father said, and my mother, to be fair, you know, my mother actually didn't want to come back into the spotlight. She wanted to stay away. She said it's taken us so many years to regroup and, you know, just get a semblance of normalcy. We like boring. We like ordinary. So let's not, let's not get back into the limelight. And
so it was your father's voice in the book where you said, who would want to hear our story? And it was you saying, but who has our story?
Yes.
Okay.
So and then, you know, my father always just said that, you know, I'm not going to write a half-baked story. If I'm going to write as a journalist, I'm going to write everything or nothing. So that everything took me 2 years to convince him.
Okay.
And hence.
Yes, because that was my next question. In fact, in the book opens, it doesn't follow a chronological sequence. It talks about different aspects. And it opens with Punjab, which in the 80s and the 90s, for those of you old enough to remember, the 80s and the 90s, the newspaper headlines would be full of people taken off buses, shot dead, bombs. It was just a terrible, frightening time. And it starts in that time, and you speak about the explosion, the letter bomb that was sent. And also you named names. The book also talks about people who didn't do what they needed to, who didn't intervene, who didn't take action. And that was a question, like, was that hard? Did you hesitate to actually indicate that this person should have done that and they didn't?
So we were very clear, both my father and I, and I think, as an aside, you know, we always say children don't remember anything, but as a 10-year-old, I probably remember more than my father at this point of what really happened, you know. But we were very clear that we're not taking away from things that have happened. We're not taking away anything from the barbaric 1984 Delhi riots. We're not taking away anything from Indira Gandhi's assassination. We're not taking away anything from Operation Blue Star. Our idea behind this story was to add what we thought was a missing peg in the entire Punjab narrative. We've always spoken about, when you speak about Punjab, it actually begins from Operation Blue Star. Things that already happened before Operation Blue Star, and there we found there's a missing link on why Operation Blue Star had to happen. Operation Blue Star happened in 1984. Our office was bombed in 1983. There are years of that story that were missing. We have completed the story. That's it. We haven't taken away anything from anybody. In that, if we had to name, this was our story. You know, there have been many names taken. We felt there was something missing, and we've mentioned that it was the Sikh leadership that went missing.
Okay. Yes, that does take courage, because there are people there, even if they are not there, the family members are there, their supporters are there. So it takes courage to actually, for a journalist, especially in today's environment, to actually talk about such things. There is that element of self-censorship, which we'll get to later on. And yes, like you said, we tend to define an event or a conflict from a certain, blue star, the assassination of Indira Gandhi, but there was a lot happening before. It's the way much of the West has defined the conflict in Gaza as October 7th and the reaction to it. It's like there's so much which happens before, It's just very difficult. And one point which struck me as very interesting, because I don't know, maybe because we are far away in the south or something, but Pratap was an Urdu newspaper run by Punjabi Hindus. Yes. And Urdu has become, Mr. Beg, Urdu has now become a language of the Muslims. It has become also politically weighted. And it's seen as that. And is it part of the othering of Muslims that is happening in the country now? What do you see? Because Urdu was not a language of only the Muslims, was it?
It was never a language only of Muslims to start with. Urdu and Hindi have same origin, from the same root. They have emerged and they have evolved. And it was in central India, Delhi, UP, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan. That was the area which really gave birth to Urdu, where it evolved. And everybody was in it. They were writing, they were speaking. It had become the cultural language of central India, actually. It is politics that really killed Urdu, particularly the politics of partition. What happened was, after independence, the entire Urdu medium school network that existed in UP, Delhi, etc., it was converted into Hindi medium schools.
Okay.
That was the biggest blow. Secondly, our neighboring country, declared Urdu as their official language. That was another blow. And gradually, non-Muslims, that is other, Sardar Sikhs and Hindus, they started withdrawing from Urdu. Even though you have a very rich tradition of non-Muslims writing in Urdu.
Yes.
People like Chagbast, and then Azad, you see, who wrote Fasana-e-Azad, Ratannath Sarshar, Allama Dattatreya Kaifi. So many of them. Among the editors, you had Khushtar Girami, whose name, you see, may look like a Muslim name, but he was a Punjabi Hindu. Gopal Mittal, for instance, who brought out a magazine called Tehreek from Delhi for many, many years. And among the popular writers, you have Gulshan Nanda, Dutt Bharati, many of them, Bashisha Pratap. They were all writing in Urdu. So it's a tragedy that Urdu had to face this, situation. But I'm not, very pessimistic, because of late it is gaining some interest, and there is a revival going on now. For instance, in Delhi, Sanju Sharaf, for instance, he established in 2012 Rekhta Foundation, a great institution. He has put most of the Urdu literature on net, which is freely available. He is running courses, online courses to teach Urdu. Then in 2015, he started this celebration of Urdu culture and language, Jashn-e-Rekhta, in Delhi, which takes place every year, and where the best talent in Urdu and Hindi, they converge And you must see to believe the kind of crowds it draws, thousands and thousands of them, all youngsters. And I'm not disheartened because
Okay, good.
lot of non-Muslims are now learning Urdu because it has become easier now to learn the language. Irrespective of whether you write it in Devanagari script or in the Farsi script, language will live on.
Yes, yes.
That is my hope.
Yes, there is a point, I think, in the book also. It's not about the script, it's about the language itself. And Jyotsna, like you mentioned in the book, before independence, and as you yourself said, there were so many, there were hundreds of nationalist Urdu newspapers. But after partition, many of them didn't survive.
So my grandfather persisted for a while after independence as well. I think my first, when you're born into a family of print journalists, all you remember is somebody or the other is always writing an editorial. And you're just supposed to be quiet, right? But my first recollection of my grandfather writing his editorial was because he used to write in Urdu. So, I used to always wonder, is this how we write? Because I'm being taught in school to write from left to right, but he writes from right to left. And I used to always get very confused. And so he kind of persisted for a very long time. And then, as my father, I think, has also been quoted, saying that at the end of the day, if a calligrapher passed away, there was nobody to replace him. If one reader left, there was no reader to replace him.
Yeah.
So, and in Punjab, despite, I think, Punjab having a huge population of Punjabi Hindus running the Urdu press before partition, afterwards, Punjabi language gained momentum after partition. So, it became a whole different linguistic debate that continues there as well.
At the expense of Urdu.
Yes.
And why did your great-grandfather actually start an Urdu newspaper? Was it because, as Mr. Beg said, it was the cultural language, it was the language of high thinking?
It was the language, period. It was the language of British administration that had moved from Persian to Urdu. And everything was in Urdu. You spoke in Urdu, you fought in Urdu, you had conversations in Urdu, you communicated in Urdu, you wrote in Urdu. And I don't think there was probably no thought process behind it.
It was the
a done
language.
thing,
It was the
right?
language.
Yes.
Okay.
And a beautiful language, I think.
Yes.
I think it is one of the finest languages.
See, the freedom struggle was actually fought in Urdu and Hindi. See, all the slogans, all the poetry that went to awaken the people, to make them aware. See, it was all, Urdu. सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना क्या है, सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए खातिल में है. This was made immortal lines when you see this was recited by the freedom fighters, the revolutionaries. Inqilab Zindabad, for instance.
Inqilab Zindabad itself, yes.
That was coined by a poet called Hasrat Mohani, who was also a freedom fighter. Urdu poet, spent a lot of time in jail. He gave this slogan. So, to say that Urdu was something foreign or it was brought by, Mughals or some others to India, it's nonsense. It's a false statement. It had its origin in India. And Khadi Boli and the local, bolis and languages, they all went into making of Urdu. And Hindi was another branch of Urdu, actually.
Okay.
Both these languages are same. Their syntax, their grammatical system, everything is
The
same.
speaker of one can understand,
Yes.
and the other, yes.
Hindustani, for instance, when Gandhiji proposed that let us have Hindustani as our national language, that was a beautiful idea, but there were no takers. unfortunately.
Maya, I have a
Sure.
couple of lines actually
Please,
on it.
please.
I found it. Our passage to freedom is also the journey of Urdu literature, where poets, journalists, and revolutionaries mobilized their angst into powerful words. Urdu became the voice, its poetic activism bearing the romantic prose, as it not only called out atrocities but also invigorated the masses. The Patwara was not kind to the language. It flickers and, despite its cultural generosity, burns predominantly in Muslim homes in India, where Urdu adds to an identity already under question. In pre-independent India, Urdu was a distinctly inclusive language uniting Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs under its umbrella. Subhash Bose inscribed Ittihad, Itmad, Kurbani as his army's motto. And from Bengal Renaissance writers to the Arya Samaj, Urdu's influence was far-flung.
And such changes, one of the unfortunate developments over the recent years, I would say.
You see, the army that was set up by Subhash Chandra Bose, all its commands, all literature pertaining to that period, it was all in Urdu.
Amazing. And speaking of the pre-independence struggle, the revolutionary time, because that really was the part of the book that got me. The book very nicely brings out the division. Yeah, I could use the term division between the peaceful attempts of Gandhi and Nehru and their followers with the revolutionaries, the ones who felt that violence, maybe very targeted specific violence, but that violence was justifiable in the cause of free India. And that is brought out very interestingly, because you're not taking sides, you're talking about each side and where they were coming from, and that the revolutionaries were more than just young people throwing bombs or shooting guns. It's a tough one, but which would you feel is the process now? Which would you feel closer to now at this stage? If you were there, if you were at that era, would you be a revolutionary or would you be a pacifist?
If I was in that era, probably a revolutionary. In this era, the definition of that has also changed, and it will be used for a different meaning. Because, you see, it was also, there was a lot of ideology behind their actions.
Yes.
It was not that, chalo, this morning, let's just go and bomb Saunders or Scott, or and also the kind of violence that we see today is very different. I mean, you can't connect that violence to the violence of these revolutionaries, the violence that we've seen in our society, you know, where we are targeting people. That is very thought out, processed violence, and it's very different from the kind of violence. I mean, these guys were not even trained. You know, they tried their luck. Like we've also mentioned in the book, you know, if they wanted to actually attack Scott, they got Saunders, you know, sometimes the pistol misfired.
The bombs went off too early.
The bombs went off too early. And they were very clear in their thought. There was this thought that, okay, you know, we are different from Gandhi's path. But if the British does not like what we are doing, and, you know, if we kind of make an explosion, so to speak, what will happen is that the public sympathy and the British, they're going to go to Gandhi. So there was also a thought process that it's a win-win either way.
That's a very interesting angle there. Mr. Baig, the same difficult question. Do you have a greater sympathy for either side, or were they both?
I have great sympathy for the revolutionaries.
Okay.
Because they were not mindless youngsters. They were all educated, young, college-going boys who chose a particular line of action.
Yes.
And there was a philosophy behind what they did. In fact, I would like the author to, read out a particular passage. I mean, Bhagat Singh, when he addressed the court, I think it's on 105, page number 105.
Yes.
If you could, that will give an idea what exactly was, working in the minds of the revolutionaries.
And a lot was going on in the mind.
Yes.
It was not just
it was not
just a basic
senseless
yes.
violence.
Yeah.
Also the fact that, there were immense sacrifices.
Yes.
So, I mean, we can speak about the big leaders, we can speak about Nehru, and we can speak about Gandhi, and we can speak about Motilal Nehru and the likes, but the kind of sacrifices, I mean, when we speak about Bhagat Singh, okay, he was a martyr, but what did he do to reach that? You know, that journey in itself was very, very tough for these guys, and it was also very tough for their families. Right? I mean, one of the freedom fighters, he had a pregnant wife, and when he was going, he told his comrades that, just look after her, and I've given the family the responsibility. So there was a lot that went off. I mean, my great-grandfather, every time my grandfather would come out from jail, 9 times in jail till the age of 22. And, the second or the third time he came out, my great-grandfather just looked at him and said, okay, for how long?
For how long are you here? Yes.
So, okay, on behalf of the helpless Indian masses, we want to emphasize the lesson often repeated by history that it is easy to kill individuals, but you cannot kill ideas that crush great empires. Empires crumble, but ideas survive. Bourbons and Tsars fell while revolutions marched triumphantly ahead. We are sorry to admit that we who attach so great sanctity to human life, who dream of a glorious future when man will be enjoying perfect peace and full liberty, have been forced to shed human blood. But the sacrifice of the individuals at the altar of the great revolution that will bring freedom to all, rendering exploitation of man by man impossible, is inevitable. Long live the revolution.
That spilling of human blood was something which Gandhi could not accept, and perhaps you bring it out very well in the book, that perhaps he did not intercede as much as he could have to get the death sentence commuted to life. That is also a very interesting angle, that many felt he could have gone a lot further, and he faced criticism for that.
And I think, Maya, there's again that collective brush of the revolutionaries and the violence. But if you look at individual episodes, there is just the Saunders murder, the misplaced Saunders murder. That was the biggest violent act that they did. Throwing bombs in the assembly, they knew where they were throwing. Those were smoke bombs. Yes. They were not even bombs. They had practiced. They knew where not to throw. There was nothing else apart from that. These guys, if you look at it, what other big incident did they do? They were just, getting a momentum going. But the
drawing attention
yes.
to what they wanted to say.
And the revolutionaries, this side of the story doesn't actually figure too prominently. When you speak to historians, and there's some remarkable historians, but they say that it was not Gandhi's place to intercede. This was not his battle to fight. Having said that, these guys, the story about the revolutionaries is also, which does not quite come out, is that they did go to Gandhi, asking him to intercede on behalf and to stop Bhagat Singh's hanging. The story, including this female freedom fighter, Durga Bhabi, who was very popular, who'd helped Bhagat Singh escape after the Saunders murder. And she personally went. And she knocked on his doors, and he said, they believe in violence, I will not do it. The biggest irony of all this is that the Mahatma, who, and I deeply, deeply revere him, stood for non-violence. Ironically, the act of hanging is violent, and you didn't stop that.
There are lots of food for thought in this, a lot of it. Mr. Baig, like as Jyotsna was saying, as it's mentioned in the book, these were not just young men carried away by the mood of the moment, throwing bombs, shooting guns. Do you think that in the late years today, while Bhagat Singh is remembered every year on the day he was hanged, on his birthday, do you think it's become one-dimensional, that he was this...
Of course. See, the point is, every great freedom fighter is being appropriated. Why only Bhagat Singh? But the thought process, the philosophy, the kind of society he was dreaming of, are we, thinking about it? The whole lot, Chandrasekhar Azad, Bhagat Singh and his friends, they were all, socialists, basically. And they wanted a just society, an inclusive society, a society which will take care of everybody. Where are we now? These are the questions that,
What the focus is? They fought the British. It becomes a...
Yeah.
Whereas he allowed himself to be critical of India. He allowed himself to be critical of the nation he loved.
Yes.
And he was allowed to be critical as well.
Yes. Whereas now any criticism is...
He was a
you
thinker
don't love your
in
country.
his own right. He was a thinker. And he was very well read. He had read what went on in French Revolution, American Revolution, American struggle for independence, all those things, you see, even though he was young, was just
23.
23 years, not an age to be hanged.
So it's very interesting because even when my grandfather, when he was taken into the revolutionary fold, so to speak, he was about 17. And the way they kind of gauged you is somebody who's already in the system would kind of target somebody and think, okay, let's give it a shot. And then they would send all this revolutionary literature to them, which used to be wrapped in a newspaper.
Okay.
And so that began to make its way to my grandfather. And then they would test him on his knowledge and his interest, and accordingly decide if he was fit enough to come into the circle of the HRSA.
I mean, it was a very different force, of course, but like, I'd spoken recently to some people from Northern Ireland, and how, for the IRA as well, they would look at the young men, they would see if young men, young teenage men, even schoolboys were interested, and would reach out accordingly. I mean, the outcome, the methods were very different, of course, but just catching them young, absolutely. And one thing about this book, about the newspaper, your great-grandfather's, your family newspaper, it was brave. It was brave through the era of fighting for independence when they faced fines and sanctions and imprisonment from the British, through the emergency. They made their point. Through the Punjab violence, when they were themselves the targets. Is there space for such a thing today?
No. But having said that, the newspaper was launched in 1919, just about 12 days before the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and was suspended a day later or 2 days later, already by the British. Was not allowed to bring out the news of the Jallianwala Bagh. But it sold out so quickly in the first day. It was shut. The British shut it for an entire year. The day it came out, it was sold immediately again. And so then the British started penalizing it. 5,000 rupees at that time was a lot of money,
amount,
right?
yes.
So every other week was 5,000, 3,000 rupees, constantly penalized. So that carried on during the British. After independence, when the emergency, when Indira Gandhi declared emergency, my grandfather said, I'm not going to write my editorials anymore. And he said, I was never censored by the British. I did not allow myself to be censored by the British. I will not allow myself to be censored in independent India. So when that midnight knock of newspapers came, the first newspaper that was knocked at was not in Delhi, as we think about Indian Express, but it was actually Pratap in Jalandhar.
Okay.
And this is, so my uncle was in the office, and he immediately understood. And Kuldeep Nair, a veteran journalist, who's a very close family friend, and he immediately called up Mr. Nair and said, watch out. And so Mr. Nair then called up George Fernandez, and which is how all these leaders went underground. So my grandfather said, I will not. So they immediately, the next few days, it was a blank column. And that column, then, of course, they were censored and said, you're not allowed. And so my grandfather said, I'm not going to write. Everybody else started. Jalandhar became actually, you all may not know it, but after independence, it became a huge hub of the press. So there are like some 12, 15 newspapers that came out after independence. A lot of them migrated.
Because people who would come
right.
from across the border.
So if there were 15, 14 came back with the editorial, and my grandfather refused. And we paid a price. So we've been constantly paying a price any which way, whether it's financially or otherwise. So it was a big hit financially because everybody does want to read an editorial. You're the only one not doing it. And then terrorism happened. That was a physical hit. And and then,
Yeah, I mean, because these lines there, which I remember, the era when truth was sacrosanct and press freedom was fought for fiercely is perhaps long gone. And you also highlight in the book about how even politicians supported that freedom. You had Nehru famously telling the cartoonist Shankar, "Don't spare me." I wonder whether that would. Now we're getting websites taken offline because of cartoons.
I mean, or we self-censor if we
self-censor,
if we
yeah,
want
that's a huge thing.
Every day is a tricky balance. Every day.
Mr. Beg, you've also worked with journalism as well. Do you feel, can it come back? Can we have that kind of courage now?
I think we must have hope.
Yes, I like your hope was there for Urdu, your hope was there. I think we need this kind of optimism, yes.
You can't give up hope, Times change. Those who are, very powerful may not be so powerful tomorrow.
Inshallah.
And then, inshallah. And awareness, proper awareness. When it comes, then those sitting, on high citadel, they will realize that it's not easy to cling to power.
It's not just the power, but Beg Saab, it's also about the misinformation that floats around in the name of journalism and the damage it does to a society.
It has done a lot of damage, yes. See, journalism as it was practiced, as it is described in the book, where is it? You see, I tell you, this book really is very timely published. It is good that it has come out now because it will transport the readers to an era where journalism as it should be practiced was being practiced. Leaders with vision, politicians who are statesmanlike existed. Moral values were very high. Now, you just can't imagine that such an era existed and such people really existed. So we must keep our hopes alive because ideals are not achieved, are reached very easily. But then to keep the ideals and to, try to reach out, that never stops.
It was so interesting also when the paper was in a great deal of trouble with the leadership in Punjab. The way Nehru fought for it, it was quite personal.
That's a very interesting chapter actually about Nehru standing up for this publication because the Premier of Punjab wanted the paper to apologize, and my great-grandfather never apologized in his life to anybody. He refused. And Nehru was passing by, and he got caught in this. So when it was almost sorted, Nehru and the Premier, Sir Sikandar, got into it became actually personal. But even in that, if you look at the language, there is still not the filth of the language that you see in the politics of today. It went on and on. There was a lot of, they were literally fighting in public. But tarika jisko bolte hai na, there was a way of speaking, and that in itself is lost, right? Actually, Maya, if I could read, taking off from what Beg Saab had said from the intro, just to link, that what metal were our freedom fighters made of? They unflinchingly stared at or down at death while bearing all emotions to unshackle India from the Raj. It is in stark contrast to the fore-nationalism and noise that pervades us today. Where have those men and women gone? In 75 years, how did the character of bravery change so drastically? Ironically, the term Shaheed, martyr, a privilege used exclusively for names like Bhagat Singh, is thrown around loosely in present-day India. Will we no longer aspire for leaders like those who handheld India and its refugees as they together embraced the seminal folds of an unfamiliar destiny? There's a similarity between books and history. Both don't age, although tinkering with them is not unusual. By wiping a past of its integral persona, communities and recollections of unimaginable valor or inconceivable loss are allowed to disappear. If not, they are sanitized to reflect collective behavior and emotions. It is lamentable how in 75 years, the ethos of our freedom struggle has been replaced by the vilification of leaders who facilitated the march of almost 8 million refugees into a new dawn. It is lazy and opportunistic to judge their actions through the lens of hindsight. In those extenuating circumstances, India was privileged to inherit the leaders that it did. The inability to draw icons from the independence movement based on ideology has also allowed for a certain disdain of the freedom movement at large.
Very true, very true.
The tinkering with history. It's right now, I think it's...
Historians are struggling.
Yeah, more than tinkering, more than the chapters being removed from school textbooks. It's a very difficult thing, which is why books like this, which talk about a certain time, a certain ideology, a certain history, and it's personal, it's first person, it's not source-based, this was your family. So that is why it's so important, I think, to capture this kind of time, because, yes, I mean, the values which were there at independence. I know you're an optimist, so give us something optimistic to think about now. It's over to you.
See, I have great hopes with the alternate media.
Yes.
See, the digital media, and you see, a lot of good work is being done there. And I have stopped watching TV. And I think a lot of, people of my generation have stopped watching TV. We follow what alternate media is really doing. Even though they also are finding a lot of difficulties, setbacks and all that. But I still have hopes that
that is true.
it will confront and it will come of age.
Yeah, because while we talk, of course, Advani's famous comment in Emergency, mentioned in the book as well, like when asked to bend, they crawled. And you also talked about how today, you said in one naughty paragraph about how today it's like people are not just crawling, they're prostrating. But the hope is, it's not as if voices are silenced. It's not as if there is nobody speaking out. It's not as if there's nobody speaking truth to power. A lot of it happening, like you said, in alternate media, on YouTube, online portals. There is a voice out there. They're still struggling to find a revenue model that can help them survive. They're still struggling to find readership that is ready to pay for news because we're used to getting it free. There are many challenges, and occasionally once in a while they're shut down, they're raided. That does happen. But there is definitely a voice there. Jyotsna and I spent years in television, in mainstream TV news. But I don't think
There is no place for us to go anymore.
Let's just say we're not in mainstream TV news anymore. Let's end the bulletin there. So it's a changing thing which has affected us personally.
When we launched the book in Delhi at the IIC, there were many people from NDTV who came because, we've worked in such a beautiful culture, and I have to,
That NDTV.
That NDTV. This is not NDTV. I'm very clear. This is whatever it is. And I had loads and loads of friends who came, and there was one journalist, a very well-known journalist, who was on the panel, and he was defending where we are today. That's his, outlook. And my whole point to him was like, you probably see about 30 people from NDTV sitting here from the time everybody was a well-known face, each one of us out there. I said, none of them have a job today. and that sums it up. But, we were on a podcast with Rajdeep Sardesai, our former boss, and my father and I. And Vikram, I hope to get my father here. He couldn't make it, but, his is a different voice, which everybody would love to hear. He's experienced most of this. So there were 3 generations, in a sense, on that podcast. And I'm a bit like Bex. I say, okay, you know, I've still, like I was telling Maya, I still have a lot to give in this field. So I can't just say, I'm done. There are days I am done. You know, then I wake up the next day and I say, keep pushing. Yeah, there's a pushback. Sometimes you lose a job. So there's no consistency. I worked for NDTV for almost 20 years. I won't never get that consistency. It lasts, I mean, the last one lasted 4 years. I think that was a good enough amount of time, you know. But so we all kind of dabble. I do stuff on YouTube and I write columns. So I move on. Rajdeep was the next generation. He's somewhere in the middle. You know, he's like this lonely warrior on television, still going on. And, you know, he was like, you know, I do it, but I do what I'm told to do. You know, I have to make Instagram reels now. At this age, at 60, I'm making Instagram reels. But, you know, he's not, he's somewhere in the middle. And my father is not optimistic. So, you know, I'm happy to hear your opinion because after 50 years, my father says, where is journalism? I've done, my father's first editorial was written when my grandfather was traveling. My father was not meant to write. I mean, he was meant to be in the marketing side of the newspaper. And my grandfather was traveling, and this was at the height of terrorism in Punjab. The number 2 guy refused to write an editorial. He said, I don't want to die. And they couldn't go without an editorial, and my father had to write on Bhindranwale, the terrorist. And that is how his journey started. So he said after 50 years, you know, he's not optimistic. So maybe I'm happy to hear Beg Saab's view. It's a mixed bag.
Yes.
No, if we lose hope, then what?
Yes. One should have hope.
Yes.
But which unfortunately brings me to another disturbing question.
I must say, this book, you see, even though it, you know, it gives an idea that it is about a newspaper, but it's not just about newspaper. It reads like a thriller at times.
It's about the time.
It's time and...
Well, full disclosure, I did tell the publishers not to put this as the name. I said it's very misleading.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. Actually, yes.
I gave up.
Clearly.
So, what it contains is much more than just story of a newspaper.
Because we spoke about how media, journalism has changed, values have changed or gone. Another huge issue, which is again covered beautifully in the book, is the whole concept of this whole nationalism, patriotism, love for the country, criticism of the country. We touched upon it earlier. Bhagat Singh himself spoke about divisions, caste, religion. That has also changed. I mean, of course, at independence time, everybody must have been so supercharged. It must have been such a... It was just the time. It was just a time. I mean, like, even my parents' generation who just... They felt hope for their country. They felt we can do this. I mean, you look at the names in the first cabinet and you go, wow. You know, that was a super time, no doubt. But things have kind of changed when it comes to nationalism. What is love for the country, you know?
It's the middle class.
Okay.
Which was, you see, leading the freedom struggle, idealism, value systems, etc. Now middle classes, I don't know, they have got a lot of money. They have other ambitions.
They're not interested. They're not interested in what
They're not
happens.
interested.
And unfortunately, there is another part to it, is that they're consuming this misinformation that is coming on our television channels evening after evening, and they're passing it on to the younger generation. And that is my biggest problem at this point, is the radicalization of the young, who have no idea about what true history was, but what the history that they're learning is from our television studios with people like our erstwhile colleague who has finished our profession.
No names mentioned.
To take.
So the children, if you speak to historians and scholars, this is what they will tell you, that when they go to colleges to teach or to schools, there's no question, nobody's questioning anything, because they've already come with their set perspective, which they have learned at home.
So in a dark way, I mean, from our point of view, the same way that the young was being reached out to in pre-independence India or in Ireland, in a way we would consider dark and unfortunate. The young are being reached out to.
And
we would call it indoctrination.
I'll tell you, my elder one, she's 16 and she's very involved with everything. So when the whole Gaza thing broke out, she'd put a post in support of Gaza. And we live in Abu Dhabi. So it's a big hot pot of, you meet all kinds of nationalities, and I think it's a great thing. But she used to study in Delhi, and all her Delhi friends messaged her saying, "What is wrong with you? Should you not be supporting Israel? What is wrong with you?" And she came back, and that I began to understand how, and perhaps it's especially the North. I mean, here is a big divide, perhaps. The North is completely vested in another way, not. This is what they've heard at home.
But that's also something very interesting. Like, even the protests against Gaza in Western universities. Of course, foreign students now face the threat of the loss of their visas to study in America, but it is a student movement. It's very much the students raising their voice. Bhagat Singh, your grandfather, they were students when they started. We now consider student activism to be JNU. That the JNU's become. But as a whole, students in India don't seem to be taking that political path. Is it part of that middle class detachment? Or?
In fact, the book somewhere mentions about, how people came out on the streets when Nirbhaya, incident took place. And what has happened now. Now, so many Nirbhayas are taking place. No reaction. No protests, nothing.
But I know that Bangalore never really had a very strong, vital student movement, but it does seem to be that they're not really... Is it because there's no, like, for example, the fight for independence is something, or being against the Vietnam War is something, it's something definite? Is it because there's nothing...
There's actually a dichotomy here, because I also find that the younger generation, say my elder one's age, they're very active on social media, politically. They're very aware of abortion, they're aware of Trump. So it's a mixed bag. I'm saying maybe it's a North thing, specifically.
They're thinking, but they're not converting that into doing. They're
Also,
not...
They're not converting into doing many things. If there's any young one here who's going to, it's a different generation. It's a different. They consume their news very differently.
Yes, of course.
Very, very differently. But having said that, what they're learning, at least in the North at homes, is not history. It's not even the truth.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. Was there anything I wanted to read?
I wanted to read about the Bhagat Singh thing. Should I?
Yeah, I just,
and then
because we were talking about how the revolutionaries become one-dimensional. That these were like, what might appeal to even the young today, that these were these brave young men who went out and were ready to kill and ready to die, that kind of thing. But there were so many dimensions to them. And one very special part of this book is Jyotsna's grandfather was there. He was arrested 8 times? Yeah, 9 times. 9 times. He was in and out of jail. He's driven Nehru around. He's spoken to these people. They were not just figures in a history book or not in a history book. They were not just figures like that. They were people who were known and admired. They were his contemporaries. And he was in the jail the day Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru were executed.
So this is the last one before we bore people anymore. This is in the words of my grandfather. So we thought that the hanging would be on the morning of 24th March, but on 23rd March at about 2 p.m., the prison barber came running to us with tears in his eyes and in a quivering voice said, "Everything is over. The Sardar is saying that they would probably be hanged today itself. He has conveyed Vande Mataram to the 2 of you." My grandfather was in jail with another inmate, Ihsan Elahi, another freedom fighter. Bringing his emotions under control, Virendra, that's my grandfather, requested Barkat to go back to Bhagat Singh and ask him for a keepsake that the two young men could treasure as a remembrance. Half an hour later, the barber returned. In his hands were a black fountain pen and a comb. On the comb, Bhagat Singh had carved his name with a blunt instrument. Isan Elahi kept the pen and I the comb. Every evening at 7 p.m., the chief warder, Chattar Singh, would lock us up after securing all other prisoners. That day, he came at 4 p.m. When we asked him why he had come 3 hours early, he became emotional and could not speak. After several minutes, he composed himself and said the end had come. The three would be hanged that evening at 7 p.m. There was nothing that could be done to save them now. Just before 7 p.m., Bhagat Singh, Shivaram Rajguru, and Sukhdev Thapar were brought out and taken towards the Phansi Ghar, or the jailhouse. As they walked, they loudly shouted, "Inqilab Zindabad." Hearing it, the other accused in the conspiracy case responded with equal gusto. Soon the entire jail was reverberating with loud cries of "Inqilab Zindabad." We too joined them. It spread even to the non-political prisoners who started shouting the same slogan, and it echoed across the jail. Then there was deadly silence. That night, no one ate in the central jail of Lahore and no one slept. Only the chief warder, Chattar Singh, could tell us, as he was present at the spot. We waited for him to come, and at 7 in the morning, he finally opened our locks. We had many questions to ask about how the three revolutionaries had approached death. Singh could not speak, and then he burst out crying. With tears streaming down his face, he said, "I am a government servant, and I have seen many hangings, but I have never seen such bravery in facing the gallows before." When the revolutionary came out of his cell, Chattar Singh made a request to Bhagat Singh. He said to him that as there were only a few minutes left of his life, he should remember Vaheguru. He was a Sikh. Hearing him, Bhagat Singh laughed, saying, "Sardarji, throughout my life, I have never remembered him. Looking at the atrocities against the poor and the downtrodden, I may even have reprimanded him sometimes. Now, with death standing right in front of me, if I remember him, he will say that this young man is both dishonest and a coward. But if I do not change my views about him, he would say that this young man was both honest and brave." Saying this, Bhagat Singh started his walk towards the jailhouse. I've known this story for a very long time, but every time I read it or when we wrote it, it still gives me goosebumps, you know.
Yes. And how they reached for the noose.
Yeah, they walked themselves and they told the magistrate, "Don't bother, we'll take it ourselves." They put it around their necks, and that was that.
When Bhagat Singh was asked to, give an apology, how he reacted, and he wrote a letter, that itself, speaks volumes about his conviction, about his faith.
He was told to apologize, and he said, "I've sent an apology letter to the viceroy." His lawyer thought, "Okay, finally." But the letter said that, you've said that we will be hanged, but since we are prisoners of the king, I think the best way to do this is to shoot us.
That was the apology. That was the appeal for mercy.
Yeah.
It's really... I'd like to open the floor for questions now.
I think we've said it all.
Hi, Jyotsna. Hi, Maya. Hello, sir. So you spoke about how the revolutionaries were so careful about the places they chose to bomb and what kind of bombs they used, to be very careful about the targets and the objectives they wanted to achieve, and they didn't want to kill Indians. I have not read the book, but I know this from the history that I've been taught from before these times. And the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about it is the phrase collateral damage that recently got used for innocent Indians, Kashmiris that were killed recently during the retaliatory fire, and then, you know, the repercussions of that within India. Is it the national conscience of that time, the people's conscience of that time? I shouldn't say national, there wasn't a nation, so to speak. But the country's, the people's conscience of that time that threw up its leaders, or is it the leaders that shaped the national conscience? You could ask the same question about journalism, you could ask the same question about activism. But how did we get here? How do we find ourselves here? I know how we got here in terms of the sequence of events, but can the sequence of events change it so much? And I do have hope. I want to tell Sir that I have a lot of hope.
There's a dire line, we get the government that we deserve. It's very hard because, like I said, when there is a huge thing, a huge glorious thing in front of a person, whether it's getting independence from colonial power, whether it's, I'm a pacifist, but whether it's a war, defeating Hitler in a war, there is that thing, that collective consciousness, that collective courage. And I remember reading, I think it was Requiem for a Wren Neville Shute, where the Second World War, and there's a character there who says, the world will never be free of war while our generation is alive, because this was the time of our lives. We were alive, we were brave, we were doing something, we were heroes. So it could be both, in the sense that the events of the time, we were under foreign rule, threw up people who wanted to fight it. Maybe now the events are not so obvious and so clearly demarcated, in the sense we do need to fight for freedom now, but it's more amorphous, it's more insidious, so it's not a clear target for people to rise up that way. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, in the sense that there is a clear...
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I would venture to say, because I often say this in the context of myself being an activist, is it took almost 100 years or more documented to free ourselves of foreign rule. So while we like to think of this unidimensional, there was foreign rule, there was a fight for freedom, and voila, we got freedom. That's not how it happened. And in those 100 years, people were doing everyday things and fighting this, and they didn't necessarily think it's coming, right? So it's a long time in the making, and it seems like that in retrospect, what you're saying, Maya, but I don't think it was like that for the people in it. Yeah, it's 100 years. Think about that, right? So I think the shape...
130 is, I think, the calculation you give in the book. 130.
Yeah, more than that. Yeah, more than that.
Since the first
yeah, it's just 1857 documentation, but of course we know it was more than that. But what I'm saying is, you know, so in retrospect, it may seem that way to us, but that's not how it was. And in retrospect, this might seem the same way to the future generations, but we seem to be thinking of it as grunt and everyday, and you wake up and go, you scroll your Instagram reels, right? So something has changed in the country's consciousness.
The way people react.
It's also become very elastic and convenient. There's the conscience that you will use when you want to use, depending on which side of the ideology you are on today. So you may speak about a rape case if you support a particular party and the opposition is in state, then you're going to speak about it, but you will not speak about it if it's the other way around. So it has filtered into every part of how we look at anything today. It's just based on where we, you know.
The horrific stampede, the tragic stampede. It's like, you know, everything.
Just a comment. The issues have changed. It's not that people are apathetic necessarily. You raised the issue of Nirbhaya, right? Nirbhaya, I thought the protests were more organic, though a lot of people say there was instigation and all that. I don't think so. I think there was a large amount of organic angst that brought people out on the streets to protest. Another similar example, a few years ago in Chennai, there was this massive movement that filled the Marina Beach for days, right? It was to protest the ban on Jallikattu and all the rest of it, right? So who brought those people out? There was no political party bringing those people out. There was something organic, right? So there is something there in society. It's just that the issues and what moves people have changed and are continuing to change. In one sense, I also think you may also want to think about the fact that there's the word middle class used, right? Earlier, the middle class was on subsistence level. What was middle class? Middle class was people who had 3 meals to eat, was middle class. Today, the middle class has a lot more to lose, right? So today, there is this feeling of the middle class. Many of us in the middle class have memories growing up where we were considerably less prosperous than we are today. And so there's a lot of feeling among people like, let's not rock the boat. I think there is a lot of that culture. Just these 2 comments.
No, it's true. But, you know, there's a frustration sometimes amongst people like us who are constantly going from one job to the other because we're paying the price. But we are saying, show us the support. You know, it's important for me to get money home as well, right? Books don't pay anything, right? I mean, I also have to have a day job. But I am also speaking out. We are also speaking out about what is wrong in society. We are also being, some days the trolling is just horrible. It is horrible. You wake up and the kind of abuses in your inboxes are horrible. But you're doing, but we're saying, yes, it is important that you also have to pay your rent, but we also have to take money home and, you know, show us the support sometimes. That's it.
So, you know, you've both been at NDTV. I think NDTV changed reporting in India remarkably. So, starting off a little facetiously, but, you know, so many of your former colleagues have all left NDTV, and many of them have been here and are very, very popular, may I add. Is there a case for all of you, like, you know, in different parts of the world, like some Secret Service agents who are who are now called back for one last mission to save the planet?
We've kept it a secret so far. It's been good.
But having said that, the point I really wanted to make in seriousness was there is a certain skill to what you all did, which cannot suddenly be replicated. And when a group as large and as talented leaves the ecosystem, it leaves that void. So, and just to kind of put it back to you all, isn't there a responsibility that you hold? Of course, everyone's free to make their own choices as per their own personal situations. But I think somewhere, journalists of a certain ilk, I think, have forgotten to organize and fight the battle together. And I wanted your comments on that.
You know, I think also there is a, as Jyotsna said, it's also about putting money on the table and surviving. There is a huge economic element to any media house. They have to earn to pay the salaries, to keep the lights burning, to keep the cameras working, to keep the studio going. It's a expensive proposition, especially the way news was done when we were really doing it. You know, detailed stories, going to the field, editing and all that. It's an expensive proposition. And I think that there are different types of personalities also. I know, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I admire the entrepreneur. I admire the person who can go out and start something of their own and get it going. I have always worked, independently to my own beliefs, but I've always worked for an organization, for somebody. Maybe it's buried very deep in me, but I don't feel I have that entrepreneurial spirit, because it's also a business. It's not just ideology. I would love a community of like-minded people to get together, and I'd love to be part of it. But I don't know if I personally have that skill, the business skill to get it going. That could be one factor, that because to make it viable requires something which perhaps I don't individually have. I'm not sure.
No, also, it's interesting, Vikram, because, you know, YouTube is floating with former NDTV people out of a job. And, you know, all of us are trying to do a little bit on it. But it's also a bottomless pit, right? So, I mean, everybody can keep coming in, but there are very few of those who are going to come up. So they may not want to join forces today because monetarily some are okay. Not some, a few, very few are okay. But maybe, Vikram, float it with somebody you know who can get us all together. I think there are a whole lot of us would love to come back together.
It's like Pranoy and Radhika Roy started a company a couple of years ago called Decoder. It's an online thing which has online news. It's not, of course, it doesn't produce as much as NDTV did. It's not a 24-hour channel. But they started with the Lok Sabha elections last year. And I was part of that. I was doing from Bangalore. It was like, you know, where you can speak, where it's not the panels were not shouting. And it was balanced. I know there is a perception among the right wing that NDTV was always very pro the other side. But I don't think I sincerely believe that was not the case on air. I think whoever was in power, we called them to account. It was not as if during the Congress years we was like, yes, everything's fine in the country. I don't think we did that. So that time when I was doing the elections for Decoder, it felt like yesterday once more in the best possible way.
Hi. I wonder, is it this apathy, is it because we've lost idealism? Because I remember in Bangalore going for marches at anti-tobacco, women in black. I remember all of us coming together, and suddenly it's all very pika, it's all cold. Nobody is standing up for Gaza. Nobody is standing up for LGBTQ. And these were issues that seem to be fermenting. Is it that we've lost sight of utopia because nothing's going to change? Is there a sense of cynicism that's spreading?
I think it could be a couple of things. I think the small groups like Women in Black, and even recently there were protests in support of Gaza. There were, but I think also, I mean, I remember covering so many of these protests across the city over the years. But are they covered anymore and highlighted in the media? They're not. So if you don't see it happening, it almost feels as if it isn't happening because it's not getting the kind of media coverage it got even a couple of decades ago. So when you would see it on the news, you had that feeling, but you don't see it on the news now. It's
That's actually very interesting because there's one side of the narrative you just don't see it on the news anymore, right? So I will come to relatives who will say, "But ये तो होता ही नहीं है. Mob lynching does not happen in the country." I was like, "Are you for real?" But then I say, it's not their fault. This is what they're watching, and this is what they're being shown. But to answer your question, also there's cynicism. There is. That things are not going to change. We are here, and let's make the best of it for ourselves, I feel.
There's so much traffic in Bangalore. How can I reach the protest spot? You know, it's something as, you know, it's...
I think it was Mr. Beg who mentioned that Bhagat Singh has been appropriated, and other revolutionaries have been appropriated by the nationalism kind of. The underlying tension to that has always been religion, in a sense, right? Why is it that it doesn't come out very strongly that Bhagat Singh was an avowed atheist? In fact, when you mentioned that they asked him about the guru and all, that was the reason he said, I cannot change what that is. But I never see that anywhere, in the sense that even though it's being appropriated, the main part of his thing, maybe it was masked by the fact that he was very well read in all the communist, you know, which is associated with atheism. But I think he was a true atheist in every other sense also. But I never see that anywhere in the media or anything that is, you know, published.
Yeah, you're right. Somebody should write about it. Josna, Maya.
No, it doesn't.
They're the people.
It may not fit the narrative that is wanted.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about people being appropriated who fit the narrative, or we change the history, we make them fit the narrative.
So I think you can't get rid of two people, Bhagat Singh and Gandhi, as much as you would not want even Gandhi in today's environment. His pedestal is pretty shaky. But you know, globally, because he's so strong globally, you can't get rid of him domestically. And Bhagat Singh, I think, goes beyond any camp because he's still revered a lot by the young and the oppressed. I think which is what we kind of like, you know, even mention in the book, which is why he remains that hardware on the mantelpiece, so to speak.
The image,
you know, every time, like, you know, we had the farmers' protests, it was photos of Bhagat Singh or his writings were being read. So in these kind of environments, he keeps making a comeback. So I think these are the two people who nobody can do anything about. Thank God for that.
But since all 1.4 billion of us are devout Hindus who speak only Hindi, where is there space for anybody else? You know, I think it doesn't fit.
Hi, Maya ma'am. Hi, Josna ma'am. Hi, Mr. Beg. I'm Bhavna. I'm a reporter from News Trail. So, as you said, you were asking, are there any young ones out here? I just started out. So, recently I experienced this thing where, like, you know, I actually reported, you know, the casualties and the death of the stampede. So it was quite an experience for me for the first time. And I was quite shook because, I mean, just imagine these ambulances pulling up, you know, with them still trying the CPR. And, you know, it was, you know, I went through a lot. So obviously, I took to social media and in a very small, personal, you know, quite lot of mine, I shared the experience, what I went through and the emotions I felt, right? But then I also spoke about how, like, my political view that, you know, I mean, you know, someone should have been accountable for this, right? Which we all are talking about. So I had this one person reply to me who's quite, you know, close to me, and they were like, what about the media out there? They were shoving cameras, you know, into people's faces. So I said, what about the media out there? Because as much as I know, there were quite a few reporters who were stuck inside the stampede as well, right? They went to cover out there and they were also stuck, right? So I feel like, I mean, we are taking so many risks. As ma'am said, it takes me so much time to go to a protest, right? So it's like we are also doing our job, right? To cover, tell people that this is happening at a certain place and, you know, make them aware. But because of, you know, like comparing journalism back then and now, the sensationalization came in and people look at media in a totally different way. So, like, why are we being continuously labeled even when we're trying to do our job, you know?
I think there's a difference between being a reporter on the ground and an editor in the newsroom. I think that's where it is.
Definitely. The people on the ground are the ones who face the impact of editorial decisions taken elsewhere. Places where I have felt at risk. When I was covering the CAA protests, I would cover anti-CAA, I would cover pro-CAA, and there was one place where we were told, you Pakistani channel, you get out. This was after I had taken the logo. I had taken the logo off. By the way, the NDTV red is purely coincidental. Purely coincidence. I'd taken out the logo, and you're there. You're the one who's facing it. There was another time during COVID when there was a change in, what do they call, containment zones. And I was doing a piece to camera with a containment zone sign in the background. Some random person comes up and says, you're NDTV, you will lie. And I'm like, what? I'm talking about containment. Like, what are you talking about? You get out of here, you cannot shoot here. I said, it's a public road. And this was not an NDTV viewer. I know this guy was not watching NDTV, but he had been taught that NDTV is the enemy. So you feel it when you're on the ground. You don't feel it when you're in the studio. In the studio, you can maybe shout down somebody you're talking to online, but when you're right there, it's a very different thing. You know, it's very hard.
I have a question at the end, but before that, I'd like to respond to some of the comments that were made. For example, the reporter said, why didn't we do this, why didn't we do that? Why weren't the reporters who were there getting onto social media immediately and asking more people who were headed there not to get there because there was a riotous situation. And I saw people heading there well after the riot began.
I think
You know,
probably
this
they,
is-
I think probably they were, but the primary job at that time is to report.
No,
If
but
you're-
this is also, reporting has another function. I mean, for example, you're talking about the COVID-19 thing. This is also reporting, right? That there's a riot going on, please don't come here. That's part of the social, no one did that, or no one of any significance did that. Well after the riot began. I had a number of points, I've forgotten most of them. The other thing is, for example, when we talk about Nirbhaya being important, that is because it is happening in the center of Delhi, and someone who is middle class in some sense. At the same time, perhaps the same day, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of rapes occurring all over the country, which have never been reported. This is something that we don't want to accept. We, meaning people who are middle class or wealthier. At the same time, I think it's important to realize that this cynicism that has set in is also because, as someone mentioned, the relatively materialistic, or shall I say, the relatively comfortable life that all of us lead, including journalists at NDTV, ex or present. So because we're in that situation, any change to that is considered too dangerous to confront, even if not directly, even indirectly. And although alternate media might help, they're also under threat. And the only reason that I think they've been able to get away so far is because they're seen as voices of the elite, and therefore not representative of too large a proportion
English
of the
language.
population.
Not that they've all got away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
I
pressure
know,
on them.
That's an occasional thing. The much more interesting thing that I find is that the powers to be today, or rather their predecessors, their ideological predecessors, did not participate in the independence movement. In fact, that they were very much against it. And now they want to tar people who participated in the independence movement, one way or the other, as being anti-national at some level.
That's touched upon in the book as well.
I haven't read the book, unfortunately, not yet. This I find very interesting, that we're willing to accept this narrative that somehow these people are flag bearers of independent India, when many of them actually worked directly against that process of becoming independent. There are many more things I want to say, but when did Pratap stop being an Urdu language paper?
No, it closed in 1996, and the Hindi one started in it closed in 1996, and the Hindi one had started in the 1950s, and that closed down in 2017.
So there was a considerable overlap between
Yes,
the two.
so there were two newspapers.
One of the comments you made was about Bhagat Singh. That's true in the Punjab and northern India. Most people in here haven't heard of Bhagat Singh.
I actually did.
Jallianwala Bagh, yes, but not Bhagat Singh.
No, I asked somebody, I said, maybe it's not of interest here because it's very north-centric.
Hi, thank you for being here. Hi, everyone. So you made a comment about, how students aren't as, maybe so active in terms of protests and going out there, or maybe not as they used to be. I mean, especially if you sort of compare it to the freedom struggle. I still see some students out there. I mean, I would say the CA and RC protests that took place were very
That
much
is- that is true. That's very much
student-led.
student-driven thing, yes.
And of course, but at the same time, like I also think the stakes are a little too high, at least nowadays, maybe, or at least it's a fearful situation because I was in college when the CA and RC protests were going on, and I got a phone from my father saying, if you're thinking of going for these, don't, because you're still in college. What if the police come and take you away?
Yes.
Who's going to protect you?
It's a reality. It's real.
Yeah, exactly, and so. Yeah, I still went, but we were always under this threat that if the cops come, if the moment they are around, just sneak away, go, run. So I think that's also a thing, because the consequences are, if the cops hound you, if the government targets you, it becomes a problem. Umar Khalid is still in jail. And for what? For a speech. UAPA charges against him. Safura Zargar was in jail. I think she got released because she was pregnant at the time. So so what's happening within student communities is, there's still an element of protest you still see in Delhi, I think. But like, the student community is often told sometimes in sort of hushed tones that if you're out there, there's a chance, maybe your university may not guarantee your safety, or if you do get caught, and if you're not the child of someone who might have some sort of political influence or big business influence, might be difficult to kind of get you out of a sticky situation. So, but the thing is, it sort of floods elsewhere as well. So for example, you self-censor when you want to make a post about something political or something that's happening, or a sensitive issue, because now I think social media posts often get targeted for means of conviction. So
You may not even get your US visa.
exactly, I think so there's an undercurrent of fear, especially amongst younger folks, which is why maybe it might be why a lot of students you might see aren't going out there, because it's a bit of a scary scenario that's been created. So it might sound like I'm making an excuse, but it is a genuine concern that I have observed and have some sort of understanding as well. So yeah, just a comment basically.
So important to go out and vote, isn't it? Because like you said, we get what we vote for. But you're a student, and let me just tell you as an aside that my mother calls me up every second day. Why have you posted this? Can you not be so direct? Can you please calm down? It's like, still, Mama? She's like, yeah, have you seen the environment? So, you're way younger.
This was way back in 1989, my very first live election. And I think Gundu Rao was chief minister, or had just been chief minister, and he had a relationship, on and off relationship with the Congress. And this was like the first days of live television. And I stood there and I asked him, Mr. Gundu Rao, what you're saying now about the Congress is very different from what you were saying 2 weeks ago. Like, how can you say something like this? And in those days, like today, politicians were not questioned. And then when the live finished, before they cut away, all of the supporters were coming around the camera. And my mother at home was like, where's my little girl? So it's a universal thing. I like your father calling and saying, take it easy.
But it's a bit different now.
No, even for Gauri, there weren't people.
Gauri, the protests after the death, it was quite a lot. It was a large gathering. That was a large gathering there, yeah.
And it made the headlines as well. So
Yeah.
it stayed in the public.
It was there. There was a lot of protests there. There was.
So if there are no other questions, I'd like to have the pleasure of the last question. I remember being in Delhi when the CA and RC protests had started, and there seemed to be this amazing sense of community and purpose in the protests. I used to work very close to Janpath at that time, and I used to literally, during lunch breaks and all, I would hop over to Jantar Mantar or to CP to just join in the protest. And there was this incredible sense of belonging and a sense of purpose that I feel that maybe because of COVID or other things, there's been a very stark difference. So while the issues have remained the same or maybe even intensified, we don't see anybody sort of initiating any kind of protest or a large-scale protest, middle-class people sort of, understanding the need to come out and voice their opinions the same way that they did during the CAA protest. Do you think journalism, especially during the period of COVID, while people were sitting in their homes, and the way media had sort of splashed out COVID and other related issues at the time, has sort of broken the back of this kind of this sense of belonging and the sense of purpose that people felt? Because after that, I feel that people are not, they're sort of scattered everywhere and they're not really together.
Also, people forget very quickly. To go back to COVID, I mean, what happened in Delhi, I don't know how bad it was here, but the fact that there were no oxygen cylinders and people were struggling, people were dying outside hospitals, and friends of ours were waiting for hours to cremate their parents. That time there was a sense of everyone had come together. And circa to today, and everyone has forgotten. And everyone has gone back into their respective holes and their respective camps, and no one remembers. I mean, people had really come together to help people get a spot at the crematorium. But no one wants to remember that. Nobody wants to question that anymore, because then again, those uncomfortable questions are going to come. So we are very fair weather friends at the moment. I don't know. I mean, whether we forget or whether it's convenient for us to forget, because at the moment, our identity is so linked, at least in the North, to who we vote for and what we, the party that we stand for. It has never been this all-consuming as it is today.
And I also think, yeah, I mean, because at COVID, I'm sure all of us, we are going to lead better lives from now on. We've got our priority right. We're going to not waste time. We all felt that. But I think that COVID has been a very interesting landmark point for many things. We all went inwards. When I was out as a journalist reporting, I'd literally be the only person on the roads. I've crossed Bangalore in 20 minutes. There was nobody out there. We were all within our own little cells. And I think we got used to that. Students who didn't have a graduation, students who didn't attend class for those years, little ones who didn't get handed around from person to person the way Indian babies are. I think it creates a sense of isolation. I think it created a sense of, if it's online, it's fine. Yeah, I'm in touch with my friend. I text them every day. We're online. We see each other's posts. And that has become a substitute. So that would also, a student protest, uprising where people have to physically come out. Why? When it's so easy to just send a post. I think COVID did mark a big change.
Right, on that note, I'd like to thank Jyotsna Mohan, Maya Sharma, and Azizullah Beg for bringing today's session to BIC. Thank you to the audience for spending your morning with us. Copies of Pratap, a Defiant newspaper, are outside for purchase and author signing. Have a good Sunday.